She had 3 seconds to decide. 3 seconds to choose between staying invisible or saving a stranger's life. 3 seconds that would change everything. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She was a single mother, working 3 jobs just to survive. On that rainy November night, she was just trying to get through her shift, earn her tips, and get home to her 6-year-old daughter. She wasn't looking for trouble. She wasn't looking to be a hero. But sometimes, life doesn't ask what you're looking for. Sometimes it puts you in a moment, one impossible moment, where you have to choose who you really are. And Sarah? She made a choice that saved a billionaire's life and put her own daughter in danger. This is her story. And I promise you, by the end, you'll never look at a simple act of kindness the same way again. Because what started with a glass of water ended with everything changing. Stay with me. You need to hear this. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Let me tell you about a woman named Sarah Mitchell. She was just like so many of us, working hard, trying to survive, doing everything she could for the people she loved. Sarah was 26 years old, and if you passed her on the street, you probably wouldn't notice her. That was exactly how she wanted it. In her world, being invisible meant being safe. She worked as a waitress at Romano's, one of those fancy restaurants in downtown Chicago where a single meal costs more than most people make in a week. The kind of place where crystal glasses sparkle under golden lights, where soft piano music floats through the air, where rich people come to eat food with names you can't pronounce. But Sarah wasn't thinking about any of that beauty. She was thinking about her feet. They ached in her black shoes. She'd been standing for 6 hours already, and her shift wouldn't end for 4 more. But she kept smiling. She kept moving. Because that's what you do when you have no choice. You see, Sarah had a daughter. A beautiful little girl named Lily, just 6 years old, with missing front teeth and eyes that lit up when she laughed. Lily was Sarah's whole world. Everything Sarah did, every hour she worked, every smile she forced when she was exhausted, it was all for Lily. Sarah's life wasn't easy. 3 years ago, she'd escaped from a relationship that had hurt her, broken her down, made her feel small. She'd left with nothing but Lily in her arms and hope in her heart. Since then, she'd been rebuilding one day at a time, $1 at a time. She worked 3 jobs. Romano's at night, a cafe during lunch hours, a bakery on weekends. Every penny went into an envelope hidden under her mattress. Every tip brought her closer to her dream, nursing school. Sarah wanted to help people, to heal them, to be more than just invisible. But that November night, everything changed. The rain was pouring down outside, turning the Chicago streets into rivers of light and shadow. Inside Romano's, everything felt warm and safe. Sarah moved through the dining room like a ghost, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, always watching, always ready to serve. That's when he walked in. His name was Daniel Cross, and even if you didn't know who he was, you could feel his presence. He was 28 years old, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Sarah's car. He moved with the kind of confidence that comes from power, from wealth, from knowing that the world bends when you walk into a room. Daniel Cross wasn't just rich. He was a billionaire, one of those people you read about in business magazines. He'd inherited his family's empire, real estate, technology, investments that stretched across the country. Some people called him a genius. Others called him ruthless. But everyone agreed on one thing. Daniel Cross was someone you didn't mess with. Sarah watched as the restaurant manager practically bowed when greeting him. She watched as the best server appeared instantly, ready to attend to his every need. She felt the energy in the room shift, like everyone suddenly stood a little straighter, smiled a little brighter. Her manager called her over. "Sarah, you're serving the private room tonight. Mr. Cross and his business partners. This is important, do you understand? Perfect service. And absolute silence about anything you see or hear." Sarah nodded. She understood. In 3 years at Romano's, she'd learned that some tables required more than just good service. They required you to be deaf and blind to whatever was discussed. The private dining room was beautiful, deep red walls, a single chandelier, windows overlooking the rainy city. A table set for 5 people, each place setting arranged perfectly. Daniel sat at the head of the table, his back to the wall so he could see everything. 4 other men joined him, all older, all powerful looking, all speaking in that careful way that means something more than what they're actually saying. Sarah served them water, then wine. She moved quietly, professionally, trying to be invisible like always. But something felt different tonight. Something in the air made her nervous, though she couldn't explain why. As she poured wine and brought food, the men talked business. Mergers and acquisitions. Investments and territories. The kind of talk that happens when billions of dollars are on the table. And Daniel Cross kept watching her. Not in a creepy way. Not like he was interested in her. But like he was studying her, cataloging every movement, every detail. His dark eyes missed nothing. It made Sarah uncomfortable, but she pushed the feeling away. Not her business. Not her concern. She just needed to do her job, collect her paycheck, and get home to Lily. The last person arrived late, a man named Philip Warren, younger than the others, apologizing about traffic. He shook Daniel's hand warmly, like they were old friends, and took his seat with an easy smile. Sarah poured his wine and stepped back to her position near the door. Everything seemed normal. Just another business dinner. Just another night. But Sarah's instincts, sharpened by years of surviving, of reading people, of knowing when something was wrong, those instincts were screaming at her. Something about Philip's smile didn't reach his eyes. Something about the way he held his shoulders seemed too tight, too controlled. She pushed the thought away. It was nothing. She was being paranoid. She had no idea that in the next 10 minutes, she would make a choice that would save a man's life and change her own forever. Sometimes the most important moments of our lives arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary seconds. We don't know we're standing at a crossroads. We don't know that everything is about to change. Sarah didn't know, but she was about to find out. The dinner continued like a carefully choreographed dance. Sarah brought appetizers, then pasta, then the main course, expensive steaks and fresh fish cooked to perfection. The men ate and talked, their conversation flowing around her like water around stone. She refilled glasses. She cleared plates. She smiled when appropriate and stayed silent the rest of the time. This was her job. This was what she did. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Daniel Cross kept glancing at her. Not constantly, but enough that she noticed. And Philip Warren seemed nervous, though he hid it well behind laughter and business talk. Then it happened. Sarah was refilling water glasses, moving around the table clockwise. As she reached for Daniel's glass, she noticed Philip reaching across the table. It looked like he was reaching for the salt shaker. His other hand was pointing at some papers on the table, drawing attention to a chart or graph. But Sarah saw what no one else did. In Philip's palm was a tiny vial, so small you'd miss it if you blinked. As his hand passed over Daniel's wine glass, just for a second, barely noticeable, she saw him tilt his fingers. Something dropped into the deep red wine, disappearing instantly. Time seemed to stop. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. Her mind raced. Had she really seen that? Was she imagining things? Maybe it was medicine. Maybe it was nothing. But the way Philip's eyes darted around, checking if anyone was watching. The way his movements were so practiced, so smooth. The way he immediately returned to the conversation like nothing had happened. Sarah knew. She knew with absolute certainty that something terrible had just happened. And in about 30 seconds, Daniel Cross would raise that glass to his lips. Her thoughts flashed to Lily. 6 years old. Waiting at home with their neighbor, Mrs. Peterson. Lily needed her mother. Lily depended on Sarah making smart, safe decisions. Walking away now would be the smart thing. The safe thing. But Sarah also saw Daniel's face. A human being. Someone's son. Maybe someone's brother or friend. A person who was about to drink poison, completely unaware. Her body made the decision before her mind could stop it. As Sarah moved back toward Daniel's seat, her elbow accidentally knocked his water glass. It was perfectly clumsy, believable enough to be real, forceful enough to send ice water cascading directly into his lap. "Oh my God!" Sarah gasped, her shock genuine even though the action wasn't. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Daniel stood immediately, ice water dripping from his expensive suit. The entire table went silent. One of the men laughed loudly, breaking the tension. But Daniel wasn't laughing. He was staring at Sarah with an intensity that took her breath away. Not angry. Surprised. And something else she couldn't identify. "It's fine," he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge that silenced the laughter. "Accidents happen. Let me get towels," Sarah said, already moving toward the kitchen. "And I'll bring fresh water and wine immediately." In the kitchen, her hands shook as she grabbed linens. Her manager appeared beside her, his face worried. "What happened?" "I spilled water on Mr. Cross," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I need fresh linens and a new wine glass." Her manager's eyes went wide. On Daniel Cross, Sarah? It was an accident. I'll handle it. She returned with towels and a fresh place setting, very aware that everyone was watching her. Daniel had sat back down, his expression unreadable. Again, my deepest apologies, sir, Sarah said, laying out the fresh linens. Let me get you a new glass of wine. As she reached for the contaminated wine glass, Daniel's hand moved lightning fast, catching her wrist. Not painfully, but firmly enough to stop her. Sarah froze, her heart pounding. Leave it, Daniel said softly, his eyes locked on hers. It wasn't a request. Sarah nodded and stepped back. She watched as Daniel carefully pushed the wine glass aside, out of reach. Then he turned back to his guests, back to business, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Sarah knew it. And from the sudden tension in Philip Warren's shoulders, he knew it too. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Sarah served dessert with robotic precision. The conversation at the table had changed, becoming more forced, more uncomfortable. Philip had grown quieter. Daniel said little, but his eyes were always watching. When Philip excused himself to use the restroom, Sarah was clearing plates. She couldn't help noticing how Daniel's gaze followed him, dark and thoughtful. 5 minutes later, there was a commotion. Philip emerged from the restroom, supported by 2 servers, his face pale and covered in sweat. He looked like he might collapse. I'm fine, Philip was saying, though he clearly wasn't. Just felt suddenly sick. Must be the flu or something. One of the men jumped up. You look terrible. We should call a doctor. No, Philip protested weakly. I just need to go home. I'm sorry to end the evening early. Daniel stood slowly. Of course. Feel better, Philip. The words were polite, but Sarah heard something underneath them. Something cold. She watched Daniel glance at the wine glass still sitting where he'd pushed it. She saw the calculation in his eyes. He knew. Somehow, Daniel Cross had understood exactly what happened. And now he was looking at her. Their eyes met across the room. 3 heartbeats. Neither looked away. In that gaze, Sarah saw intelligence, curiosity, and something that might have been respect or might have been danger. She couldn't tell which. Then Daniel turned back to his guests, and the moment broke. But Sarah knew, with absolute certainty, that her life had just changed forever. The dinner ended shortly after Philip left. The remaining men paid their bill, including a tip so large that Sarah stared at the receipt twice to make sure she'd counted correctly. They gathered their coats and disappeared into the rainy Chicago night. But Daniel Cross stayed behind. Sarah was clearing the private dining room, stacking plates with trembling hands, when she felt his presence in the doorway. She didn't turn around immediately, finishing her task before finally meeting his gaze. Can I get you anything else, sir? She asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He stood there, hands in his pockets, studying her with that same intense focus. Up close, she could see his eyes more clearly, dark brown, almost black, filled with an intelligence that missed nothing. That was quite a spill, he finally said, his voice neutral. Yes, sir. Again, my apologies. Interesting timing. Sarah's hands stilled on the plates. Her mind raced. Denial seemed pointless. This man saw too much. Sometimes accidents happen at the right moment, she said carefully. The corner of Daniel's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Indeed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out several bills. Hundreds. More money than Sarah made in 2 weeks. He laid them on the table. For the inconvenience, he said. And the dry cleaning. Sarah looked at the money, then back at him. That's not necessary, sir. I insist. I can't accept this. You can, Daniel said quietly. And you will. Because I think you know that what you did tonight was worth far more than a few $100s. Before Sarah could respond, he turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused and looked back. Be careful, Sarah, he said softly. Some things once seen can't be unseen. And some people don't forget acts of kindness. Then he was gone. Sarah stood alone in the empty room, her heart racing. How did he know her name? Of course, the reservation would have listed the server. But hearing it from his lips made everything feel more real, more dangerous. She stared at the money on the table for a long moment. Pride wrestled with practicality. Lily needed new winter boots. The rent was due next week. Finally, practicality won. It always did. But as Sarah pocketed the bills, she couldn't shake the feeling that accepting this money meant accepting something bigger. A connection to Daniel Cross that she didn't understand and hadn't asked for. The rest of her shift passed in a daze. She served other tables, smiled at other customers, but her mind kept returning to that moment. The wine glass, the choice, the look in Daniel's eyes when he'd understood what she'd done. Finally, her shift ended. Sarah changed out of her work clothes, collected her tips, and headed out into the cold November night. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, reflecting the city lights in pools of color. The subway ride home to her small neighborhood felt longer than usual. Every face seemed suspicious. Every glance felt weighted with meaning. Sarah told herself she was being paranoid, but she couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. Her apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms in an old building where the heat didn't always work and the pipes made strange noises. But it was hers. It was safe. It was home. Mrs. Peterson, her elderly neighbor who watched Lily on late nights, was dozing on the couch when Sarah arrived. She woke with a start. "Oh, Sarah dear." Lily was perfect, as always. "She's been asleep since 8:30. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Peterson." Sarah pressed money into the older woman's hand. Less than she'd have liked to give, but all she could afford. After Mrs. Peterson left, Sarah checked on Lily. Her daughter was fast asleep, one arm wrapped around her stuffed rabbit, her face peaceful in the dim light from the hallway. Sarah stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching her breathe. This is why, she thought. This is why I work 3 jobs. Why I accept help from neighbors. Why I count every penny. This little girl is everything. Sarah leaned down and kissed Lily's forehead gently, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I love you, baby," she whispered. "Everything I do is for you." In her own room, Sarah counted her tips in the dim light. She added Daniel's money to her savings envelope, watching the stack grow just a little bit thicker. Still not enough for nursing school. Still so far from her dream. But closer than yesterday. She stood at her window, looking out at the city lights in the distance. Somewhere out there, Daniel Cross was probably asking questions, investigating what happened tonight. And somehow, Sarah was at the center of it all. What have I done? She thought. The next morning, Sarah tried to return to normal. She made breakfast for Lily. Oatmeal with a sprinkle of brown sugar, the way her daughter liked it. She walked Lily to school, kissed her goodbye at the gates, and headed to her lunch shift at the cafe. But everything felt different. Sarah found herself looking over her shoulder, noticing the same car parked outside the cafe 2 days in a row, seeing a man in a gray coat on her subway car 3 times in 1 week. Was she imagining it? Was her mind creating threats that didn't exist? On the 3rd day after the dinner, her phone rang. Unknown number. Sarah stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She almost didn't answer, but something made her press the green button. "Hello, Miss Mitchell?" The voice was professional, unfamiliar. "My name is James Barrett. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Daniel Cross. He'd like to meet with you, to discuss what happened at Romano's." Sarah's mouth went dry. "I don't think that's a good idea. He's willing to compensate you for your time. Generously." Every instinct screamed at Sarah to refuse, to hang up, to pretend this call never happened. But that practical voice in her head, the one that always calculated costs and benefits, spoke louder. "When?" she heard herself ask. "Tonight, 7 o'clock. There's a coffee shop on Lincoln Avenue, Bella's Cafe. Mr. Cross will meet you there." Sarah closed her eyes. "I'll be there." After hanging up, she sat in stunned silence. What was she doing? Why was she agreeing to this? But deep down she knew. Because Daniel Cross was right. What happened that night couldn't be ignored. It had tied them together, whether she wanted it or not. And maybe, just maybe, he had answers to the questions that were keeping her awake at night. That evening, Sarah dropped Lily off with Mrs. Peterson, kissed her daughter goodbye, and headed toward Lincoln Avenue. Toward Daniel Cross. Toward whatever came next. Bella's Cafe was warm and cozy, with soft lighting and the rich smell of coffee filling the air. Small tables were scattered throughout, occupied by students with laptops, couples sharing desserts, and people reading quietly in corners. Sarah spotted Daniel immediately. He sat at a back table, a cup of espresso in front of him, untouched. When he saw her enter, he stood, a gesture of courtesy that seemed almost old-fashioned. "Miss Mitchell," he said. "Thank you for coming." "I'm not sure I had much choice," Sarah replied, sitting down across from him. Something flickered in Daniel's eyes, maybe amusement, maybe respect. "There's always a choice. You could have refused." A waiter appeared. Sarah ordered water, despite Daniel's offer to buy her anything she wanted. She needed to keep her boundaries clear. After the waiter left, They sat in silence for a moment. Daniel studied her with that intense gaze that made Sarah feel like he could see straight through to her soul. "I had the wine tested," he finally said, his voice low. "The glass that you made sure I didn't drink from." Sarah's breath caught. "And concentrated poison. Enough to cause a heart attack within 20 minutes. By the time anyone realized what was happening, I would have been dead." He said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that it took Sarah a moment to process the words. "Philip," she whispered. "Philip Warren has disappeared. His apartment is empty. His phone is disconnected. He's probably in another country by now." Sarah's hands trembled as she wrapped them around her water glass. "I don't understand. Why would he do that? Why would someone want to kill you?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, a shadow crossing his face. "My father built an empire over 40 years. Real estate, technology, investments. He was brilliant, but he was also ruthless. He made enemies. He destroyed competitors. He did things that weren't always legal." Sarah listened, trying to reconcile this with the man sitting across from her. "When he died 2 years ago, I inherited everything," Daniel continued, "including the expectation that I would run the business exactly as he did. But I didn't want that. I've been trying to change things, make the company legitimate, ethical, clean up the damage my father did. And Philip disagreed with that. Philip and others in the company saw my changes as weakness, as betrayal. Philip was promised a high position in the old structure. My reforms threatened his future. So he made a choice." Daniel's voice hardened. "He tried to remove me." The waiter brought Sarah's water. She waited until he left before speaking again. "So what happens now? Now I need to find out who else was involved. Philip didn't plan this alone. Someone higher up orchestrated everything. Someone who knew my schedule, my movements, who could disable security cameras." Daniel paused. "And those people know their plan failed." Fear gripped Sarah's chest. "What does that mean for me?" "It means they're going to wonder why. They're going to want to know if you saw something, if you know something." Daniel's eyes were serious, concerned. "It means you might be in danger." "I have a daughter," Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. "She's 6 years old. She needs me." "I know." Daniel's voice softened. "I know about Lily. I know she's in 1st grade. I know Mrs. Peterson watches her when you work. I know you're saving for nursing school." Tears burned in Sarah's eyes, partly from fear, partly from anger at this invasion of her privacy. "You had no right to investigate me. I had every right to know about the woman who saved my life." Daniel leaned forward. "But I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you so you understand the situation, so you can protect yourself and your daughter." "How am I supposed to do that? I don't even know who these people are." Daniel pulled out a business card, simple, white, with just a phone number printed on it. He slid it across the table. "This number reaches me directly, 24 hours a day. If anything seems wrong, if anyone approaches you, if you feel unsafe for any reason, you call immediately." Sarah stared at the card. "I don't want this. I don't want any connection to your world. Neither did I, if I'm honest." Daniel's smile was rueful. "You've complicated my life, Sarah Mitchell. But you also saved it. And that means I'm responsible for keeping you safe. I just want my normal life back. Then help me end this threat. Let me find who's behind the conspiracy. Once they're dealt with, you can go back to being invisible. I'll go back to my world. Our paths won't cross again." Sarah looked at the business card, then at Daniel's face. Despite her fear and anger, she saw something in his eyes that surprised her, genuine concern. Maybe even loneliness. She took the card. "What do I do now?" she asked quietly. "Now you go home. You kiss Lily goodnight. You go to work tomorrow like nothing has changed. But you stay alert. Trust your instincts, they've served you well so far." He paused. "And Sarah? Thank you. Not many people would have done what you did." Then he stood, left money on the table for their drinks, and walked out into the Chicago night. Sarah sat alone for a few minutes, the business card feeling heavy in her pocket. Through the cafe window, she watched people walking past. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the danger and complications that had suddenly entered hers. Finally, she stood and headed home. To Lily. To the small apartment that suddenly didn't feel quite as safe as it used to. But as she rode the subway through the dark tunnels beneath the city, Sarah made herself a promise. Whatever it took, she would protect her daughter. Even if that meant accepting help from a billionaire she barely knew. Even if that meant stepping further into a world she didn't understand. Because that's what mothers do. They survive. They adapt. They do whatever is necessary to keep their children safe. And Sarah Mitchell was very good at surviving. The next few days passed in a fog of fear and hypervigilance. Sarah went through her normal routine, cafe shifts, picking up Lily from school, evening shifts at Romano's, but nothing felt normal anymore. She noticed everything. The man who rode her subway car 2 mornings in a row. The woman who seemed to be watching from across the street. The car that idled outside her building with its engine running, no one getting out. Were these real threats? Or was she seeing danger in every shadow? Lily noticed her distraction. "Mommy, you're not listening," she complained one evening as they made dinner together. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." Sarah forced herself to focus on her daughter, on this simple moment of cutting vegetables and boiling pasta. "What were you saying?" "I asked if you can come to career day at school next week. We're supposed to bring our parents to talk about their jobs." Sarah's heart squeezed. Career day, where other parents would talk about being doctors, lawyers, engineers. And she would be what? The waitress who worked 3 jobs to barely make ends meet? "I'll try, baby. Mommy has to check her schedule." "Jessica's mom is a veterinarian," Lily said wistfully. "She gets to help animals every day." "That's wonderful," Sarah said softly. Then she knelt down beside her daughter. "But you know what? Every job is important. Everyone who works hard and tries to help others, that matters." "What do you want to be, Mommy?" The question, so innocent, nearly broke her. "I want to be a nurse. I want to help people who are sick or hurt." "Like a superhero?" Sarah smiled despite everything. "Something like that." "Then you should do it," Lily said with the absolute certainty of childhood. "You can be anything you want, Mommy." If only it were that simple, Sarah thought. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number. Her heart stopped. "Hello? Miss Mitchell?" The voice was rough, older. "This is Detective Frank Morrison with the Chicago Police Department. I need to ask you some questions about an incident at Romano's restaurant on November 14th. Sarah's blood went cold. "What kind of incident?" "I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Can you come to the station tomorrow morning?" "I work tomorrow morning." "This is important, Miss Mitchell. A man is dead." The world tilted. "What? Who?" "Philip Warren. His body was found in the river this morning. Evidence suggests poisoning. We have witnesses placing him at Romano's the night before he died. You served his table." Sarah's hands shook. "I don't know anything about." "I'm sure you don't. But you might have seen something without realizing it. Please, Miss Mitchell. 10 o'clock tomorrow. District 12 on Michigan Avenue." The line went dead. Sarah sat frozen, her mind racing. Then, with trembling fingers, she pulled out the business card Daniel had given her and dialed the number. He answered immediately. "Sarah." Just her name, but the way he said it, like he'd been expecting her call, like he'd been waiting, sent relief flooding through her. "The police called," she said, her voice barely steady. "They said Philip is dead. They want me to come in for questioning tomorrow." A pause. "Don't go." "What?" "I can't just ignore the police." "That wasn't a real detective, Sarah." Daniel's voice was calm but absolute. "The Chicago PD doesn't call witnesses at 10 at night. They show up at your door with a badge. That was someone pretending to be police, fishing for information." "How do you know?" "Because Philip Warren isn't dead. He's in Montreal, hiding in a hotel under a fake name. My people found him this afternoon." New fear replaced the old. "Then who was on the phone?" "Someone who wants to know what you saw. Someone who's trying to scare you into revealing information." She heard movement on his end. "Where are you right now?" "Home." "Lily's asleep. Lock your doors. Don't open them for anyone. I'm sending security to watch your building tonight." "Daniel, I can't live like this. I can't have my daughter living in fear." "I know." His voice softened. "I know this isn't fair. But right now, my priority is keeping you and Lily safe. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the next steps." "What steps? How does this end? Trust me. Please." After they hung up, Sarah did a circuit of the apartment, checking every lock with shaking hands. This was her home, her safe space, the place she'd built for herself and Lily after escaping an abusive relationship and starting over with nothing. And now it felt violated. She stood in Lily's doorway, watching her daughter sleep peacefully, one arm wrapped around her stuffed rabbit. Lily had no idea their world had changed. No idea her mother had made a choice that had drawn them into something dangerous and complicated. Sarah made a silent promise to that sleeping child. Whatever it took, she would keep Lily safe. Even if that meant accepting help from Daniel Cross. Around 3 in the morning, Sarah heard it, Someone testing her doorknob, checking if it was locked. She froze, her heart hammering. The sound stopped. Then came a soft knock, barely audible. She didn't move, didn't breathe. After what felt like forever, footsteps retreated down the hallway. Sarah grabbed her phone with trembling hands. Before she could dial, a text came through from Daniel's number. My security just confronted someone outside your building. Male, approximately 30 years old. He claimed to be looking for apartment 4B. Your building only goes to 3F. He left when challenged. Are you and Lily okay? Sarah typed back, we're fine. Scared, but fine. The response came immediately. Pack a bag. Enough for a few days. We're moving you somewhere safe. I can't just leave. I have work. Lily has school. Call in sick. Lily can miss a few days. This isn't negotiable anymore, Sarah. Someone just tried to get into your apartment. Sarah looked around at her small home. The place that represented everything she'd fought for, everything she'd built. But she thought about that doorknob turning. About someone trying to get in. When? She typed. 1 hour. Be ready. Sarah moved through the apartment in a daze, packing clothes and Lily's favorite toys. How did you explain this to a 6-year-old? How did you make running for your life sound like an adventure? At 4:30, she gently woke her daughter. Lily, sweetheart. We're going on a little trip. Where? Lily blinked sleepily. Somewhere safe. Somewhere nice. But we need to go now, okay? Can Mr. Floppy come? She held up her stuffed rabbit. Mr. Floppy definitely comes. By 5 o'clock, they stood outside their building with 2 packed bags. A black car pulled up, sleek, expensive, the windows tinted. A professional-looking man stepped out and showed Sarah identification. Miss Mitchell? I'm with Protective Services. Mr. Cross sent me. They climbed into the car. Lily pressed her face to the window, watching the city pass by as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Sarah held her daughter close, trying not to think about whether she'd ever see their apartment again. They drove for about an hour, leaving the city behind. Eventually, they turned into a long driveway leading to a beautiful house, white with blue shutters, surrounded by trees, the kind of place Sarah had only seen in magazines. Daniel stood on the front porch, coffee in hand, watching their arrival. As Sarah stepped out of the car with Lily in her arms, the morning sun breaking over the trees, she felt like she was crossing a threshold she could never uncross. Her old life, the cramped apartment, the 3 jobs, the careful invisibility, was receding behind her like a dream fading in daylight. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, questions without answers. But also, strangely, the first glimmer of hope she'd felt in years. Daniel walked down the porch steps, his eyes meeting hers over Lily's sleepy head. Welcome, he said quietly. You're safe here. Both of you. And despite everything, despite the fear and the confusion and the impossibility of this entire situation, Sarah believed him. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives become doorways to something better. Sometimes the choices that scare us most are the ones that set us free. Sarah didn't know what would happen next. But standing there in the morning light, with her daughter in her arms and a man she barely knew promising to protect them, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. Let me tell you how the story ends. Or rather, how it begins again. Daniel kept his promise. Over the next 2 weeks, he systematically uncovered the conspiracy against him. Not through violence or threats, but through evidence, financial records, recorded phone calls, irrefutable proof that he presented to the right people. The threat dissolved like morning fog in sunlight. You're safe now, Daniel told Sarah one morning over coffee in the safe house kitchen. Both of you. You can go home. Sarah looked around at the house that had become strangely comfortable. And then what? We just go back to normal. I'd like to help with nursing school, Daniel said. Your tuition. Living expenses while you study. Daniel, I can't accept. It's not charity, Daniel interrupted gently. It's an investment. You saved my life, Sarah. Let me invest in yours. Sarah looked at him, this billionaire who had entered her life in the most unexpected way. Why? Why does this matter so much to you? Daniel was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. My whole life, people have wanted things from me. My money, my connections, my power. They smile and pretend and calculate what they can gain. He looked up at her. But you? You risked everything for a stranger. You expected nothing in return. You reminded me that goodness still exists in this world. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. I just did what anyone should do. But most people don't. That's what makes it extraordinary. 6 months later, Sarah walked into her first day of nursing school at Northwestern University. She wore new clothes, not expensive, but nice, clean, without any holes or stains. Her textbooks were paid for. Her tuition was covered. For the first time in years, she could focus on learning instead of just surviving. In the audience at orientation, Lily sat with Mrs. Peterson, waving enthusiastically and grinning with pride. And in the back row, barely visible, sat Daniel Cross. He'd kept his distance over those months. A phone call here, a coffee meeting there. He respected her boundaries, understanding that Sarah needed to build her new life on her own terms. But he was there when it mattered. When her car broke down, it was mysteriously repaired. When Lily got sick and needed expensive medication, it appeared at their door. When Sarah doubted herself, worried she wasn't smart enough or strong enough for nursing school, a text would arrive. You're stronger than you know. Keep going. Their friendship grew slowly, carefully, built on respect and understanding rather than romance or obligation. Two people from completely different worlds, connected by one moment that had changed everything. Sarah graduated from nursing school 3 years later. Top of her class. She got a job at Children's Memorial Hospital, working in pediatrics, helping sick children, being the kind of person she'd always dreamed of becoming. At her graduation, as she walked across the stage in her cap and gown, she looked out at the audience. Lily, now 9 years old, was on her feet cheering louder than anyone else. Mrs. Peterson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. And Daniel was there too, clapping with genuine pride for the woman who had saved his life and, in a way, changed it forever. After the ceremony, Daniel found her in the crowd. Congratulations, Nurse Mitchell. Sarah smiled, the title still feeling new and wonderful. Thank you. For everything. I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have, Daniel said firmly. You would have found a way. You always do. I just made the path a little easier. Why did you do all this? Sarah asked. Really? It's been 3 years. You didn't owe me anything. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Do you remember what you told me? About the woman who helped you leave your abusive relationship? How she gave you a phone number that saved your life, and you never saw her again. Sarah nodded. You said sometimes people come into our lives exactly when we need them. They do what needs to be done, and then they're gone. Daniel smiled. But I didn't want to be gone. I wanted to see what happened next. To watch you become the person you were always meant to be. Lily ran up then, throwing her arms around her mother. Mama, you did it. You're a real nurse now. Sarah hugged her daughter tight, breathing in the strawberry scent of her hair, feeling the weight of how far they'd come. From that tiny apartment where they'd counted pennies and worried about every bill, to this moment, graduation, a good job, a future that looked bright instead of desperate. I did it, baby, Sarah whispered. We did it. That evening, Sarah, Lily, Daniel, and Mrs. Peterson went to dinner at a nice restaurant. Not Romano's. Sarah had quit that job the day she started nursing school. Somewhere new, where the memories were fresh and untainted. As they ate and laughed and told stories, Sarah realized something profound. Her life hadn't been saved in one dramatic moment. It had been saved over and over, by the woman who'd given her the shelter number, by Mrs. Peterson who watched Lily for pennies, by her own stubborn refusal to give up, and yes, by Daniel Cross who had turned a single act of kindness into a partnership that changed everything. Later, after Lily fell asleep in the car on the drive home, Sarah and Daniel stood outside her new apartment. Bigger than the old one, in a safer neighborhood, but still modest, still hers. Thank you, she said quietly. For believing in me. Thank you, Daniel replied. For reminding me what matters. For showing me that wealth means nothing if you don't use it to make the world better. So what happens now? Sarah asked. The same question she'd asked him 3 years ago, but with a completely different meaning. Now you live your life, Daniel said with a smile. You help sick children. You raise an amazing daughter. You become everything you were meant to be. And you? I'll keep trying to be better. To build a company that helps people instead of hurting them. To honor the second chance you gave me. He paused. And maybe, if it's okay with you, I'll check in sometimes. Make sure you and Lily are doing well. I'd like that, Sarah said softly. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Two people who had walked very different paths but found unexpected common ground. You know what I learned from all this? Sarah said finally. What? That one choice can change everything. One moment of courage, one decision to do the right thing even when it's scary. It ripples out in ways you can never predict. She looked up at the stars barely visible through the city lights. That woman who helped me never knew what happened after she gave me that phone number. She never knew she saved 2 lives that day, mine and Lily's. And when I spilled that water glass, I had no idea it would lead to all of this. The universe has a strange way of connecting people who need each other, Daniel said thoughtfully. Maybe that's the real story, Sarah reflected. Not about danger or conspiracies or billionaires and waitresses. It's about how we're all connected. How one person's kindness creates waves that touch lives they'll never even know about. Daniel nodded. And how the smallest acts of courage can change the world. Sarah smiled. Or at least change 2 worlds. Yours and mine. As Daniel drove away that night, Sarah went inside and checked on Lily, who'd been carried upstairs by Mrs. Peterson. Her daughter slept peacefully, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, completely unaware of how different her life would have been if her mother had made a different choice that November night 3 years ago. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching her daughter breathe, counting her blessings. A good job. A safe home. A future full of possibility instead of desperation. And an unlikely friendship with a man who had started as a stranger and become something more. Not romantic love, but something equally valuable. Mutual respect. Shared understanding. The bond between 2 people who had saved each other's lives in different ways. She thought about the woman at the pharmacy who'd given her that phone number years ago. Wondered where she was now. Hoped she knew somehow that her small act of courage had created this. A nurse who would go on to help hundreds of sick children. A little girl who would grow up safe and loved. A life that mattered. Thank you, Sarah whispered to that unknown woman, wherever she was. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. And then she made a promise to herself. She would be that person for someone else. When she saw someone struggling, someone scared, someone who needed help, she would act. She would be brave. She would spill the water glass. Because that's how the world changes. Not through grand gestures or dramatic heroics, but through ordinary people making extraordinary choices in small moments. Through kindness rippling outward like waves on water, touching lives in ways we can never fully measure. Sarah Mitchell had been invisible for so long, trying to survive, trying to protect her daughter, trying to just get through each day. But she wasn't invisible anymore. She was a nurse, a mother, a woman who had found her courage and used it to save a life. And in saving that life, she had somehow saved her own. That's the real story. That's the truth that matters. One choice, one moment, one glass of water, and everything changed. The end. A note to the listener. We all face moments like Sarah's. Times when we see something wrong and have to choose whether to act or look away. Times when helping someone else might cost us something, might be risky, might complicate our lives. This story is a reminder that those moments matter. That courage doesn't always look like fighting dragons or saving the world. Sometimes it looks like a waitress spilling a glass of water. Sometimes it looks like an old woman handing a stranger a phone number. Sometimes it looks like choosing kindness when fear would be easier. You have that power too. Every single day, you have the chance to be the person who acts instead of looking away, who helps instead of ignoring, who spills the water glass when someone's life depends on it. You never know how far those ripples will reach. You never know whose life you might save. So be brave. Be kind. Be the person who acts. Because the world needs more people like Sarah Mitchell, ordinary people who make extraordinary choices in crucial moments. The world needs you.